Hello, everybody. This is Rick Manning, President of Americans for Limited Government. Lots of stuff happening on Capitol Hill this week, in the House in particular. We have four different appropriations bills coming up, and so we're kind of scrambling, trying to get which ones are coming up and what's in them, and what amendments need to be made, and kind of working through some of that stuff. But I do. Fact of the matter is, Speaker Johnson is moving at breakneck speed to get the appropriations work done. And what we're working on is trying to make certain that some of the appropriations work that is getting done, that if amendments are needed, that we're advocating for certain things to be added to them. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, but I wanted people to understand something about this. These appropriations bills were finished a while ago, so they have been sitting dormant, waiting to come to the floor. And so a lot of members have put in amendments to those appropriations bills, riders, and the like. And the process is the Rules Committee then decides whether or not they're going to allow amendments to the appropriations bills, and what amendments they're going to allow, and amendments that are contradictory, which ones take precedence. So they're going to set up rules for the consideration of these bills. What we prefer in a bigger context, if you have more time, if you're doing this under, in April, May, June, July, is to have an appropriations bill and come up and have it take a week on the floor, and you have hundreds of amendments being offered, and we have a real fulsome discussion about how the money should be spent, and where it should be cut, and have that real discussion in a lively forum, which allows a lot of different members to participate. That's the most healthy process. It's the less controllable process, but because of where we're at in the calendar, because we're now almost, tomorrow's Halloween, we are not going to be able to, that's not something that's going to happen. We're going to have a smaller discussion, and the appropriations bill for next year will hopefully have those more fulsome, bigger discussions, which is what should occur. But what we do at Americans for Limited Government on this is we seek to provide our thoughts to members about things that could be put in to these appropriations bills. One of the results of that, and we're going to have the Transportation and HUD appropriations bill coming up in the House floor, for instance, which means it's the Housing, Urban Development, and it's the Transportation Department, and the funding for those two departments. And we've had a long-term fight since the Obama administration over whether or not the federal government should control zoning processes, local zoning, using fair housing as the justification for a federal government control. And we've been successful in the past in getting in blocking certainly the Obama administration from implementing regulations dealing with it's called affirmatively furthering fair housing. The Trump administration agreed and eventually ripped the affirmatively furthering fair housing regulation out. The Biden administration has been busily trying to reconstruct it and under a different format. And the current Transportation HUD appropriations bill includes a prohibition on both the Obama version and the new Biden version from being any funds being spent on implementing them. So we have an ongoing battle about whether or not the Biden administration is going to be able to implement a federal takeover of local zoning. And this is something that we're up to our necks in. We write a lot about it, and it's essentially are we going to have zoning done by census maps by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., or local concerns can be taken into account. So we've got a kind of a war in that regard, and the THUD bill, it's the Transportation HUD appropriations bill, that's being considered does in fact include that appropriations rider. So without getting into discussion of whether or not what transportation policies should be put forward, and what housing policies per se should be funded, what should be funded, whether or not we should, if truthfully, we should kind of wipe the slate clean on our whole housing policy. And in transportation, it's ridiculous to send $1 to fixed rail in a world where fixed rail will be obsolete before we even get the darn things built, because in the self-driving car world that we're entering, there's no need. The fixed rail doesn't make any sense. So essentially, it's an outmoded form of transportation that the left loves to fund, and they love to fund it because they hope that everybody else but them will use it, and nobody ever does, and then it becomes nothing more than graffiti-strewn trash heap where people don't pay the fares, and it becomes a crime, underground crime haven location. So all in all, that's, we're going to end up with that fight downstream, not one we're going to get into this particular battle, this particular time. But the fact is that when you look at interior, there are things that can be done on interior. I know that Representative Paul Gosar has presented some things, and we're digging in to see if what is being allowed and what isn't being allowed in terms of amendments. So we're trying to, the point is, ideas are interesting, but getting something turned into an actual amendment, and then trying to do an actual real live, get a vote on it or get agreement by the Rules Committee to allow for that amendment to be heard on the floor, and then get 217 votes in favor of that amendment on the floor is a process. That's the hard work. And so, that's what we're kind of engaged in right now. And so that's kind of what's going on. One of the interesting parts about this, and this is why Speaker Johnson is so important. He gets it. He gets this. What we're talking about, he gets what the constitutional role of government is. And we're not going to win every battle, because he's got to, manage 221 Republicans to get to 217 votes. And that's hard, as we've discovered over the last 3-4 weeks, right? But his advantage is that because he understands the challenges and has a grasp on some of the problems that exist from his committee work, that he's going to be much more open to limiters, things that limit the size and scope of government into some of these appropriation bills. And so that's one of the things we've been working on today, is trying to figure out some things that might be able to be done with the EPA and the Environmental Protection Agency, and trying to limit the Environmental Protection Agency's actions in light of Supreme Court decisions that put real limitations on what the EPA can regulate and what they can't regulate. And so these are the kind of things where translating, and I know this is inside stuff, but is translating what we talk about in terms of general big picture stuff, kind of the talk radio, government's too big, and some examples of crazy stuff government does. Translating those complaints into actions that specifically prohibit the actions, taking an out of control bureaucrat I'll just give Justice Department, an out of control Justice Department employee who is engaged in trying to stop, to censor Americans. Okay. Well, guess what? Congress can say that employee isn't going to get salary next year. You can't fire the employee, but they lower their salary to $1 and effectively fire them. So those are things that you can do, and Congress needs to do. And we're setting the stage with these discussions that are happening now. We're trying to set the stage so when the Senate can't agree, the House gets their bills passed and it doesn't agree, they push the decision back 3 to 6 weeks, and you then have a fight over what you're going to come up with. We have a sound foundation for different policy riders that limit the size and scope of government through directives using the power of the purse. And in some ways, this is trying to change the entirety of the appropriations process and turn it on its head. Appropriators historically look at themselves as spenders of money. They want to have earmarks so they can say, gee whiz, you want a cowboy museum in Searchlight, Nevada? Well, gee, here it is, but now you got to vote for my bill. You got to vote for all the other cowboy museums that are all over the world. So that the U.S. government's funding. So that's the traditional earmark. You get to spend money in your district. You get a bridge, or you get something like that. Well, what we're trying to do is turn that on its head. So where we do riders that effectively pinpoint things that we don't want money spent on, and pinpoint employees who are abusing their authority that we don't want to continue to exist in the federal government. And so create incentives to vote for appropriations bills based upon cuts and limitations on government and the like, and turn the appropriations process on the Republican side from being one of spending money to one of limiting government and using it as a means to cause government to shrink. One of the aspects of this is, what do you do about something like employees not showing up to work, federal employees not showing up to work? Well, first of all, you have to identify how many of them aren't showing up to work. How many of them are supposedly working from home, but aren't actually logging into the computer on a regular basis? Well, that's something which you can know. Congress needs to demand the information. Because if you then discover, as was discovered in 2020, that 25% of the federal employees weren't logging in at all for the whole year, from March to December 2020, if you discover that there's a massive number who aren't even participating in their job, then there's one set of responses you can give. But if you're finding they're logging in once or twice a week and kind of casually doing their job, there's another set of responses. We have the opportunity, and those are things that Congress needs to get to the bottom of. So these are all different ways of using the appropriations process to, like it's supposed to, for Congress to take control and direct the executive branch on how they're supposed to spend the money. We put on top of that, you have the Supreme Court, which has ruled that government agencies are not allowed to have regulations that go beyond the actual written mandate by Congress and the authorizing law. Kind of obvious, but over time you get regulation creep, where a regulation gets placed on top of another regulation, another one gets on top of another regulation. And suddenly you've got regulations that are out on a ledge with no legislative actually language underpinning them. They just have a series of regulations underpinning where they grow over time, and suddenly they become a regulatory ledge that has no support, no constitutional support. Identifying those regulations and actively defunding any spending on them, finding out from Congress, from the agencies, well, how many people do you have working on that regulation, implementing that regulation, enforcing that regulation, and how much money is being spent to do that, and say, we're not doing that. All money's on that. We're cutting that money, and you're not going to spend any money on that regulation. That regulation is dead because Congress says so. Those are things that we're working on. It's at a nascent stage, but with this new speaker, there is a new hope that we can develop a constitutionally based system that says essentially, if Congress didn't say you can do it, you can't do it. That means we have to win battles to win Congress. That's how it should be. And so there's a lot of different ideas. And the reason we're talking about this is because today Robert and I have spent an enormous amount of time kind of going back and forth and trying to figure this out. And he's been researching stuff and coming back, and there's a lot of back and forth. But that's what you guys expect us to do. And so it's my hope that you'll support that. We've got 4 appropriations bills. I'm going to spend some time talking about the Israeli one, and then I'm going to get out. The Israel appropriations bill, Speaker Johnson, in direct defiance of what Mitch McConnell wants to do, has separated out the Ukraine appropriations part and the Israel appropriations part. We're trying to get the language so we can see if the Israeli appropriations part still includes money to go to the Palestinian Authority and Gaza under humanitarian purposes through the UN. If it does, then we're going to argue that we've been arguing that needs to be separated out also. And it needs to be separated out for a simple reason. The UN had the Iranian foreign minister speaking about effectively wiping out Israel and praising Hamas and Palestinian Authority and giving a public speech on the UN stage, supporting his terrorist clients. And it's an organization that gives their public stage to a country that is that's sponsoring terrorism and is directly responsible for funding the terrorist actions that occurred from Hamas, from Gaza, to attack Israeli citizens. You cannot trust the UN to implement any kind of humanitarian aid or funding, because they are nothing more, nothing less than proxies for the people who are conducting the terrorist acts. That's just the truth. And so now the question becomes, will U.S. taxpayer dollars be sent to those who are dedicated to the destruction of Israel, to the murder of 7 million Jews, driving them into the sea, from the river to the sea? Will U.S. taxpayer dollars in that bill go to Israel for weapons and to Hamas and to the Palestinian Authority for weapons to fight against them? You don't want to be in a war, but you certainly don't want to be funding both sides of it. And if we're giving any money to the UN or any of these other non-government organizations that are based in Hamas or based in the West Bank or based in Lebanon or based in Iran or based in Jordan, we are effectively funding the terrorists. And so we have to make sure that doesn't occur. And I'm confident Speaker Johnson's on top of this. But once again, we need to look at the language. We need to know what's going on, and specifically how that's being done. What's more, we've also been talking a lot about the border. Well, in the appropriations, the Ukraine-Israel appropriations, one of the elements that was put into there was border security. And it said border security, but it didn't mean border security. It was hire a bunch more border patrol agents to process people who are coming across the border, so it gets done faster, and then put them on planes or buses to go around the country, and then pay local non-government organizations to provide housing, to get additional housing, to hire additional people to handle the traffic flow, to feed the illegal aliens who come across, to provide, get them signed up for all the social welfare programs that exist, and effectively create a permanent processing infrastructure for the 3 million people who came last year, and more than 3 million people you can expect to come this year. So that's Biden's idea of border security. Well, Republicans, in looking at this package, need to separate that out and say, that's important. Good. Let's do this, and push that appropriation to force Biden to secure the border, take the money away from sending people over the country and put it into stopping people from coming into the country, putting restrictions on forcing Biden to follow certain guidelines like the Mexico City or Mexico agreement accord that Donald Trump negotiated, and really begin the process of slowing the action at the border to a trickle. When Biden took over, there were 90,000. We had 90,000 illegal immigrants hitting our border a month. 3 months before, it was down in the 60s. But you have to just say what it was in January of 2021 when Biden took over, and it was about 90,000. So you had, and now we're getting three times that number, 3 and 4 times that, no, not 3 times that number, on a regular monthly basis. So that's your challenge. How do we at least, you cut it by 2/3, actually by 200%. If you just get it to go back to the number that when before Biden opened the borders. So that's something that can be done with this funding request. That's something that can be done with this funding request. Now there'll undoubtedly be compromises to get there, but that's something which I think you can rally people around to get something done. Speaker Johnson, this is going to be one of his challenges, is doing that. And then finally, you have a couple of other elements to this. You have the Ukraine funding. What accountability is there going to be put on the Ukraine funding? A large part of that funding is going to keep the Ukraine government alive by providing social services to people in Ukraine, like government pensions and things like that, and making sure the farmers whose land has been destroyed and they're not able to create crops, that they are able to that they're able to survive. So that's part of the $61 billion that's scheduled for Ukraine. And lastly, and strangely, the Biden request includes something, new submarines for the Pacific submarine fleet. And it's really kind of an odd addition, because you sit there and you say, don't we have a defense spending bill? Why is this in here rather than in the defense spending bill? And the answer, quite honestly, is most likely that the defense spending bill gets capped to a certain amount. They're not going to, and so they don't want to trade off new submarines for something else that the Defense Department wants. But since they've got this supplemental bill, they're going to shove in a bunch of money for new submarines, and that doesn't mean the submarines aren't needed. I've talked to some people who tell me the submarines are, truthfully, our submarine fleet is aging, and there is a real need for new submarines, particularly Iowa class submarines. But at some point, if you want new submarines, you got to ask for it in the right, in the defense spending bill, and that's something which I think should be addressed. Because the reason they don't want to do it that way is because the defense spending bill is subject to the debt ceiling caps, and the debt ceiling, which means that the Pentagon would have to figure out, what $15 billion they don't want to spend on something else to get more submarines. So this is one of those. It's an accounting thing, and it's a way of juicing the defense budget without having to actually show it in the defense budget. And so there's a lot of those kind of tricks that get played. It remains to be seen what ends up happening with that. I actually, from what I understand, our submarine fleet is aging and it needs to be refurbished. I just really am concerned that somehow it ends up, we're going to vote on it in the midst of, and say, you either support Israel or you don't. And, oh, by the way, we're going to buy a bunch of new submarines with this that have nothing to do with Israel. No, go to the defense, do it under the defense appropriations bill, and let's have a conversation about what's needed and what's not needed from defense. And if it's decided that new submarines are one of the things that are needed, then, go ahead and buy the new submarines. But you better then offset it with something that you're not going to be buying. And that's that's the way it's supposed to work. So it just kind of irritates me that they're trying to jam the system. And so that's kind of what's going on. It is what's going on. So this week is appropriations week. It's going to be full combat, and so expect some statements out of us, expect some perhaps to take action out of us on this. At the very least, praise the we can praise the new speaker, and quite honestly, this appropriations writer was done under Kevin McCarthy. But we can praise them for trying to stop the the Biden administration from from taking over local zoning. That's something they are doing in the THUD bill, and we're going to do a statement out praising them for putting that in. I'm not going to get into the rest of it because, as I said, if I were writing, it'd be a dramatically different bill. But that piece of it is a fundamental thing that we need for limited government. And so you got to praise when they're doing something great, and you've got to sit there and and then we'll work the rest of it and try to find a way to restructure how they're funding these agencies and some of the things they are funding, because truthfully, it is absurdly stupid, beyond stupid, to fund mass transit projects or the California rail system that's massive cost overruns that may never get all the way built, so they can have high-speed rail from one remote location to another remote location in Central California. It's just these are stupid things. They're wastes of money. They're left-wing pipe dreams that are no longer relevant in a world where fixed rail makes no sense. That's just the reality. Fixed rail is in terms of freight, it makes sense, but as a mode for passengers, there's a reason why Amtrak has to supplement their passenger funding every single year. You have to pay a fee in order, so I can take an Amtrak to New York City at a cost that makes any sense at all, given the fact that you've got planes that fly up there every single hour. And it's the American public finances that. But travel, intercity rail subways are just dumb. They're dumb in the modern world, in the 21st century. Once again, we're applying a 19th century solution to a 21st century problem, and that's how you get windmills and subways. In the case of windmills, a 15th century solution. So all in all, we're trying to stop them doing stupid things and spending money on stupid stuff. But the stopping affirmatively furthering fair housing and its latest iteration are critical things to do to not allow the federal bureaucrats to usurp local control over zoning. So that's what we're fighting on. That's what it's about. And there's really a new hope, a new expectation of being able to have some success on some of these fights with a new speaker. And this isn't denigrating Kevin McCarthy at all. It's just when you have new ideas and you have an opportunity to press new agendas, and the fact that this speaker is philosophically aligned with the limited government constitutional premise gives us a unique opportunity to be successful and to actually move the ball when you only have one half of the legislative branch, and you don't have the executive branch at all. It gives us a chance to move the ball on a few things to be successful in limiting the size and scope of government, and hopefully are able to then change the makeup of both the Senate, and get a bigger majority in the House and the White House. So the things we set up today, or we're able to implement in January, late January, early February of 2025. That's the goal. That's where we're at. That's how we're going to save this country. And this is a good first start. And I'm just happy to be able to report on something that is about moving forward with positive things. I'm going to take a couple of things. Committee on Present Danger. I'm on the Committee on Present Danger. I attend meetings occasionally, but I sit in on the phone calls all the time. Frank Gaffney is a real close friend. Dee Dee Lottison with that she's a great lady. China reported Speaker McCarthy received large donations from China, giving the appearance of an elite capture. I don't know if Speaker McCarthy received large donations from China or not. What I do know is that Speaker McCarthy is, um, he's he's now a member of Congress. He's not Speaker anymore, and it's one of the challenges in a lot of these. Foreign entities are not allowed to give money to U.S. candidates. There is the ways that into their campaigns, but what they can do is they can set up third-party groups that then do advocacy on behalf of something or on behalf of the person or against them, or they can give funnel money to party organizations and the like that serve that purpose. And some party organizations are controlled by individual politicians. And so it's a really muddy kind of field. There's no doubt that China is attempting to infiltrate every office in Capitol Hill. And as a result, people have to be careful. And sometimes if they find that they have taken money from a Chinese affiliated group, then they may have to give it back. But it's one of the challenges that exist. I have found that Speaker McCarthy, after being a strong advocate for the Trans-Pacific Partnership and stuff like that, once Donald Trump became the nominee, he became far less of a globalist as he followed the lead of the presidential nominee, Donald Trump. And so it was he had a journey. I don't know what money he took when. I do know this. I do know that we know Chinese corporations directly gave money to Hunter Biden and the person who's giving money to Hunter Biden, hiring him, was somebody who was actually convicted in U.S. court as somebody who was attempting to turn U.S. congressmen and U.S. influencers towards China. And so the person who gave him $1 million was actually somebody whose whole job was to flip people's loyalties. And so, yeah, I know that occurred. I know that's one of the things we're going to be discussing under the Biden impeachment. And so, yeah, if I were China, I was trying to protect my good friend Joe Biden, I would want to make all sorts of wild allegations about politicians who supposedly were supported by China to invalidate their claims against the incumbent president and his family. So it's going to be ugly. There's going to be an ugly world, and I'm going to tell you, not everybody's clean. So, except for me. But with that, that's all I'll deal with that. Jim DeMarco. Now I'm going to tell you guys, Jim DeMarco is a friend of mine from way back, and we first met in 4th grade. We went to elementary school, middle school, junior high school back then, and high school together. And he's a guy who I've maintained good contact with over the years. And Jim and I don't always agree on everything, but it's why should we? And Jim, and we got to get together this last week or two, and see he and his lovely wife Denise, who were in the picture. So it was a real fun time. Anyway, so let's see what Jim has to say. It's an interesting idea to use appropriation bills to actually limit what the money can be spent on. Hopefully you can get some legislators to work in that direction. Yeah, Jim, I actually had a project starting about 2013 where we were trying to do this. And we thought we had it set up where the guy who was our lead on it was going to become Appropriations Committee chairman. And unfortunately, Speaker McCarthy decided differently. And so the guy who was supposed to be Appropriations Committee chairman left Congress. And we kind of ended up they're looking at a few years of work of setting something up, kind of going by the wayside. But yeah, this is I think this is an idea that can take off. I think but the conservatives need to say, I want to be on the Appropriations Committee. They need to push to take over the Appropriations Committee, as opposed to letting the big spending Republicans, sit nicely on that committee and raise money from all the people who want to spend money, and then contribute that money off to the National Republican Congressional Committee, so the NRCC has lots of funding. It's a funding by people who want big government, and it's a hard nut to crack, but we've got some good ones on there. Representative Andy Harris from Eastern Shore of Maryland is a solid conservative who's one of the cardinals on the one of the 13 subcommittee chairs on the Appropriations Committee, and we've got a couple of younger members who are on there. So we're still making progress, but this concept is one that a speaker can push down and say, this is what I want my Appropriations Committee to do. And so this is one of the things we're encouraging the new speaker to do, is to push down this concept, this idea. But what has to happen for that to work is individual Republicans who don't want to vote for a spending bill because it's more spending that they want to do need to be willing to say, I'm willing to vote for the spending bill at this level, assuming it's still a reduced level, but not as much as they want, at this level, if we're able to cut government over here, and over here, and draw the talons in by prohibiting certain things to be done. Those are, essentially, this is one of those ones where it's hard for conservatives because conservatives don't want to vote for these big appropriations bills. I don't, because I certainly don't like a lot of the stuff that's in them. But if you sit there and as a group, you can get 5, 6, 10 things done. And when it comes back from the Senate, maybe the speaker is able to get you 3 to 4 of them done out of that negotiation with the Senate and the president. Well, at that point, you've cut the size of scope of government on 3 or 4 things that matter. And it's how the Democrats have grown this thing, this gargantuan government. They've grown it by incrementally increasing the power of government and the size of government. And we have to be smart enough and disciplined to incrementally reverse the growth of government, and understand, if with the Supreme Court doing stuff saying that the federal government only is able to do what the Congress told them they could do, we have the capacity to identify those things and cut off the tentacles of the big state octopus. And then when we go after the administrative state and the personnel problems, we have, with the stuff we've already discussed, and I won't talk about here again, we then will be talking about killing the brain of the administrative state. And so we cut their power by limiting the things that they can do, and we cut their ingenuity by doing anything but what they're limited to do. We cut that ingenuity by going after the personnel. That is the prescription for permanently, the next 20 years, limiting this government and limiting its growth and allowing the private sector to catch up and surpass the government and just grow really rapidly, because it won't have as much government garbage messing up the system. That's the technical term. So anyway, that's kind of what we're working on. It's big picture, but it's but with this speaker, I think we have a chance to get it done, because he's a constitutional lawyer and he understands this stuff. It's in his DNA to say they can't do that. Well, guess what? That's in our DNA too, and we're going to try to work this together. So let's see what else we have. By the way, Ron Lippman, I do want to say I have great respect for Committee on Present Danger. Like I say, I'm really good friends with Frank Gaffney and Dee Dee Laudison, who's the executive director. So I have tremendous amount of respect for them and the work that they do. Let's see here. We need to get out of the UN and kick them out of New York, where their headquarters of our military is going to be needed here to fight against the pending threat of insurgents that are already in America. Popeye, I'm not going to disagree with you. I think that it's time for the UN to go to Geneva, and let them go to Geneva and let them operate without our money, and because right now the UN's making a play to be the world government. They are attempting to do so. They make no bones about it. The World Health Organization stuff that's going on to try to have World Health Organization be the have their edicts on pandemics and different diseases be the international standard is you know that's something they're doing. Is something the Biden administration is assisting on, and to continue and to allow for the UN with the things they're doing on climate and the like to have any validity in terms of trying to supersede U.S. law and the U.S. Constitution through international edicts is a violation of, I think, Congress's oath of office. It's a violation of the president's oath of office, and we need to stop it. And and I think the UN's purpose, if they can't stand up and say and condemn Hamas for what happened for the attacks on Israel, then there is no purpose for the UN in this environment. And that's just a fact. And I think with the cost of apartments on Manhattan, I think they could move them out of that nice building there in Manhattan, refurbish it to be apartments, and I'm sure a lot of billionaires would love to inhabit them in the future. So I'm on board. Ron, I'm going to just, who else may be count? I don't know, but I think it's something we need to pay attention to. I'll tell you, Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emmer, what's his name? Doug Emold or something. He was partner in a law firm that facilitated Chinese U.S. corporate multinationals working with the Chinese and becoming embedded into China. He was one of the attorneys who was doing those kind of negotiations at the top end with the top Chinese government to get U.S. corporations into China, and getting this intertanglement that exists right now that's so hard to unweave. So since Kamala Harris, the money she has is from her husband, and he made his money by doing deals with China, you can kind of draw your own conclusions there. There you go. Get rid of the FBI, DOJ, and Maria Catania. And the government, like other countries, have no government, and they run perfectly fine. To get rid of them all, lock them up first, and take the IRS. I'm going to tell you, we have been consistently expressing our how much we hate what the FBI has become, and how concerned we are about the CIA working with the FBI to manipulate U.S. politics, but also to have access to our data, and be able to manipulate using the Googles of the world, social media companies, to try to manipulate thought in America. It's dangerous and needs to stop. And Rand Paul actually has really good legislation that would deal with the censorship issue. Unfortunately, there's not at this point enough people who are outraged over what's going on and what's been happening that they're willing to take any substantive actions. I'm hopeful that Jim Jordan, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, will be able to rally the troops to try to hold the FBI accountable and the DOJ accountable for weaponization of government, and CIA, because all the alphabet soup agencies are involved, and that he'll be able to create something that will in fact put them on the hot seat and hit them in the pocketbooks to force them to go back to what they're supposed to be doing. But I will just, from a depressing standpoint, I'll just tell you, we lost a vote on cutting CISA, 25% cut in CISA. CISA is the agency within the Homeland Security that has been playing point guard in terms of spying on the American public for political purposes, and censoring conservatives on everything from COVID to elections to whatever their next thing is. So they've been kind of the leaders in censoring America, particularly American conservatives. And it is and so there was a bill that was put up that would have cut CISA's funding by 25%. And it didn't get a majority of Republican votes. And it didn't get a majority of Republican votes because of the following excuse. We live in a dangerous world and we need to know what's going on. And so we're afraid that if we cut CISA and this intelligence gathering and the ability to uh, control the media, and we're going to be at a disadvantage against the very terrorists who you mentioned in your question. And it's garbage because the FBI thinks the Catholic Church, people go to church that is made when they have delivered the mass in Latin, that those Catholic churches are a threat are threats and have become, and so they want to infiltrate Catholic churches that use Latin mass. Director Ray, expressed outrage over it, but that's what happened under his watch. You can't say it didn't happen because it did, and I don't know anybody got fired because they did it, and I don't know it's not still going on. They just aren't putting it in writing in paper. So we have an FBI that's way out of control. We have a system that's way out of control, but we couldn't get 217 Republicans to vote to cut the budget of CISA to stop this from occurring and stop the ability of the Department of Homeland Security to censor conservative thought. We need to make some changes at the polls. We need to start getting candidates who will stand up and say, no, civil liberties matter. In a world where we just had Hamas attack civilians, and in a world where we've allowed 3 million people across the border, another few 100,000 in the last year who we don't know who they are, a world where the Sinaloa cartels, not just Sinaloa, have soldiers on our streets, in a world where we know that the Iranians have soldiers on our streets, in a world where we have enemies from around the world with soldiers on our streets, Chinese and others. It's hard to sit there and it's hard to tell members of Congress, well, gee, we don't want to know what they're saying. The problem is very simple. Our Department of Homeland Security is not directed at those people. Our Department of Homeland Security is directed at us. That's the problem. And so at least, and that's why we have a hard time getting enough Republican votes to actually do what they need to do in terms of this. And it's as a fight we're continuing to fight. There's FISA reauthorization coming up for the FISA court, another opportunity to fight it. So there's a lot of things that are happening, but right now we need to get better congressmen. That's just going to say that. How about, was that direct enough, Maria? I'm going to go and I'm just going to call it quits now. Oh, Betsy, I'll get one more for you. At a WHO meeting, they talked about having a climate pandemic. I wouldn't be surprised if they did it right before the truth. Yeah, Betsy, you are 100% correct. Amazing what health, under the idea of health, they can say they can do anything and claim it's under health, and it would give and the climate pandemic would then allow them to effectively shut down all fossil fuel production. They'd be able to sit there and they'd be able to put in all sorts of draconian rules, because after all, I think we're down to 5 years until we're past the point of no return based on the AOC proclamation for when she got elected a few years back. So maybe we're only down to 7 years. But the draconian approach that in terms of destroying the capitalist system, the free enterprise system, that they have advocated, this is a chance for them to remake the world where the oligarchs, essentially in the Plato world, where for Plato's Republic, Plato couldn't figure out how to have the world work, and his system of government he came up with was let all the philosophers rule, and because they knew better, and everybody else has to follow what they have to say, let the smart know-it-alls rule, and create rules that they don't have to follow, but everybody else will for their own good. And meanwhile, and if we just destroy the standard of living and we get our population, the world population, down to 1 billion people, it might be declared to be sustainable. The problem is, it's fine if you're one of the billion who get to survive, but the problem is if you're one of the 7 billion who don't. And so ultimately, all these philosopher kings, know-it-alls from the World Economic Forum and elsewhere, they want to cement that they're able to survive, but they really don't care about you and me, and anybody who's not. So that's the problem. That's the big lie that they tell, that they care about humanity. They want to eliminate 7/8 of humanity. That's what they want to do. And and as in all things, one of the reasons humanity has been able to grow to 8 billion is because economic prosperity has allowed it. The ability to feed more people than ever before has allowed it. The ability to get water to places where water could never be gotten before has allowed it. Those are the things that have made it so we can have 8 billion people on the planet. And the people who are at the World Economic Forum thinks that's a bad thing. They, ironically, they probably have Sally Struthers on their do not invite list because she keeps doing things trying to get people to help children in Africa on those videos you see late at night, particularly at the end of the year. So those are, so let's just call it what it is. It's a fight for whether we're going to be humans, or are we going to be utilitarians who say, we're going to base whether you survive based on what you contribute and your worth. And if we don't determine that you have enough worth, we're not going to give you the resources to survive. That's ultimately what they want to do. And the questioning always ends up is who gets to make those decisions. And the people they don't want to make the decisions are you and me. They want to make those decisions themselves in some enclave at Davos. And so they're protected. And the rest of us find ourselves living in a brave new world where scarcity is the norm. And we have to beat them. So we just have to beat them. So thank you very much, Betsy, for bringing that up. And I'm going to close this out. I appreciate you all tuning in. And we'll be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.